Museums Victoria respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands where we work, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and First Peoples language groups and communities across Victoria and Australia. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and their emerging leaders. Our organisation, in partnership with the First Peoples of Victoria, is working to place First Peoples' living cultures and histories at the core of our practice.
Welcome everyone. My name is Tim Ziegler and I'm the Collection Manager of Vertebrate Paleontology at Museums Victoria. This means that I get to tell my nephew that I am the boss of the dinosaurs. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to Melbourne Museum tonight for this special event and extend a warm welcome to those who are joining us online as well. I want to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land on which I work and where we are gathered this evening. I'll pay my respects to their ancestors and to all elders and First Nations people who are joining us this evening. I want to also say hello to Cindy with the iridescent hair and Kiri in the Melbourne uniform of all black, who are providing the Auslan interpretation for tonight's program. Thank you both for being here tonight. Tonight's event is part of Future Forum's Ideas Shaping Tomorrow. This is a series of monthly conversations proudly presented by Museums Victoria to bring together the world's brightest innovators and creative thinkers to reflect on the big ideas and important questions that shape our future. Tonight's program, Deep Time Paradigm. It's inspired by our permanent gallery, Gandel Gondwana Garden, that recently opened. This outdoor paleontological garden explores the richly connected and dynamic landscapes that have characterised Victoria over deep time. In the garden, you'll encounter Ice Age marsupial predator Thylacoleo in an underground den that it once made its home. You'll see rainforests once found in coal seams that shaded the first ancestral Banksia trees. And you'll find Victoria's state fossil, the extinct giant amphibian Coolosuchus clevelandi, among Cretaceous survivors living Wollemi pine. As a paleontologist and a museum scientist, it's particularly important for me also to acknowledge fossils as pieces of country, even as they are housed and interpreted in the state collection. Guided by the Yulenge group of elders, the garden lends a speaking voice to the plants, animals, and fossils throughout. And in doing so, it further invests in us all knowledge of the living cultures of First Peoples custodians in southeastern Australia. We aim in the garden to enrich visitors' connection to the environment and to propagate the duty to be custodians of the planet's natural wealth, that of its past and its future. We're also delighted to be hosting this event. It's the latest step in Museums Victoria's 169-year journey, investigating how natural and cultural heritage can serve and inspire. Tonight, we're going to hear from an all-embracing group of impressive speakers on using this knowledge to transform our ways of thinking, solve complex environmental challenges, and ensure a thriving future for our planet. So thank you. And it's my pleasure now to invite our host for tonight, ABC Radio National's Natasha Mitchell, to introduce the guest panel.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tim. What a lovely introduction. It's so great to see you all here. And big welcome also if you're joining us online with the live stream. We really want your participation today. So pull out your phones, pop them on silent if that's cool. And we're going to weave your questions in throughout. We'll probably get a bit of a chat going first, but I'd love your questions. So to do that, if you're online joining us or if you're here in the room, what to do, just go to slido.com. So that's slido.com. And the code is, and I'll probably repeat this a couple of times throughout, is #Gondwana 1603. Gondwana 1603. Have we got that? Excellent. So that's slido.com, and then the code is #Gondwana 1603. Just tap on your neighbours for a reminder of the code. Love your questions. I'm going to weave them in throughout. And what a cool exhibition this is for kids and kids at heart, that's me, to really explore physically and sensationally what the ancient environment here in Victoria might have looked and felt like. And we're really keen to explore what that actually is all about and why that's important to do, why it's important to think into the deep past as well as into the deep future. And I want to acknowledge that thousands of generations of Aboriginal people have walked, lived and loved for millennia before this moment that we're gathering here today, and will continue to guide us into the deep future with their living knowledge and leadership. And Earth is an old mama, isn't she? I mean, imagine this, 4.6 billion years old. Have I got that right? 4.6 billion years old. And really that amount of time is very difficult for us to imagine. And a lot has gone down in that time. Life, an explosion of life, the evolution of life, single-celled organisms, dinosaurs, us and under us, the movement of continents. We have a geologist with us tonight. And all around us, changing climate, ever changing. And a lot can happen in an incredibly short time frame too, which is what we're going to explore today as well. You know, we are but a blink of an eye if you think about the history of the Earth, and yet we have altered every physical, chemical, every aspect of this Earth's environment we have altered in just the blink of an eye. What an incredible thing to think about. And we are obsessed with the here and now. Short-term thinking for short-term gain, aren't we? Think about those election cycles. You know, give it to me now. What if though, and this is what we're going to do tonight, we considered the long now in everything that we did. You know, not just hundreds of years from now, but millions of years from now? What if we planned for a child born many millennia from this moment? And what would that look like? What sort of thinking would that involve? So we have fantastic minds joining us tonight to help us do that. Uncle Larry Walsh is a Kulin Nation elder. He's a cultural leader, a storyteller who works in pretty much the most cool role other than Dinosaur Man over here. He's the elder in residence at Museums Victoria and is honorarium adjunct professor at Victoria University. We have Dr. Anne-Marie Tozzolini. She's senior lecturer in geography, earth and atmospheric sciences at the University of Melbourne. And Anne-Marie studies ancient plant fossils here in Victoria to understand ancient climates, environments and ecosystems. Another cool job. And joining us all the way from California, hello sir, we have Dr. Vincent Yolenti, who's a cultural anthropologist who studies the way humans understand time and envision the future. Vincent's book, Deep Time Reckoning, is a very cool exploration of how nuclear waste experts have had to grapple with deep time consequences in their planning. Let's give them all a big welcome. Hey Vincent, thanks for staying up so late for us. Lovely to have you with us.
Not a problem. Happy to be here. Plenty of coffee on deck too.
Plenty of coffee. And don't forget slido.com, #Gondwana 1603 for your questions. I want to get a sense from each of you why, for you personally, it's so vital to think about deep time. What does that look and feel like for you? What's got you hooked on thinking deep into the past and perhaps deep into the future? And I'll start with you, Vincent, given that you're staying up so late for us.
Right, thank you. Let's see. There's several benefits on a personal level. Taking a few minutes each day to ponder deep time or contemplate or commune with the planetary long term, it can detach you from your day-to-day thinking patterns and help you experience the world afresh. It helps you see your life as but one sort of a speck in a wider ecology or a universal fabric. And for some, this might sound a little depressing, but it does not have to be. For many, it can evoke an enduring sense of awe, an appreciation for one's position in a vast cosmos and a long-term planetary story. And this is backed by psychological studies too. There's research on how experiencing awe, especially awe that comes from pondering these long-term timescales, can make people feel more collaborative, less egoistic, more altruistic, more open to social connection. It can foster creativity, help you overcome mental blocks. Awe can be mind and heart expanding in the terms of anthropologist Barbara King. It can also help us become more responsible planetary stewards over the long term as well. So that's what draws me to it.
That's so key. And I might come back to you because, I mean, although I'll ask you this now, Vincent, you say all that, but also people get very overwhelmed by thinking about deep time. It's hard to conceptualise, isn't it? It's a struggle. All we can do is really think about this year or next.
It's true. And as an anthropologist, I would point to some of the unique cultural circumstances we find ourselves in right now. Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist, once called it tempocentrism. This mass enculturation in throwaway consumerism, in frenzied culture wars and sudden stock market shifts, in the hustle of the gig economy, fickle pop culture trends, and these attentional economies and social media that play with the dopamine in our brain. Many people feel like they're stuck on a treadmill, fixated on the next quarterly earnings report, the next election cycle, or 24/7 cable news cycle. So it's tough to break out of. We also have this ancient mental hardware, these ancient brains focused on shorter term time spans, yet we have to face the planetary challenge of changing our cognition a bit, and stretching our time horizons to encompass slower moving planetary challenges. I'm thinking biodiversity loss, microplastics accumulation, climate change, antibiotic resistance, mass deforestation, asteroid risk, and more. Yet unfortunately, we're kind of stuck in what the geologist Marcia Bjornrud calls chronophobia, this sort of state of time denial. And it's a mixture of the vanity of living lives of instant gratification, but also this sort of dread of not wanting to look in the eye how in the long run, well, we're all ultimately dead. So there's many different reactions to deep time.
Yeah.
Possible.
I think that's an interesting point. I do think that part of this is that people fear that they won't exist at some point, that we fear death, don't we, really? We might talk about that as an audience, hey? Uncle Larry, what about you? What does it mean for you to occupy a sense of deep time?
Well, for me, being a storyteller, it gives me a sense of what happened yesterday and the effects of it today. Like one of my, they reckon, two of my favourite stories is about koalas. But the thing is, when you examine the stories carefully, you find some truth in what they say. Someone once said to me, I think it was one of my daughters, "Dad, why haven't you written the third story?" I said, "Dam's got in the way." Koalas are one of those creatures that live only on leaves. In a drought, there's no moisture in the leaves. In a bushfire, there's no moisture in the forest. So where do you find koalas? In a waterhole. So and by the way, one time a scientist had a look at bones somewhere along an area, and he actually found that drought involved, I think in the second story, was 20,000 years ago. So it's about learning the story, learning what its other meanings are. I sometimes say, you know how you all learn all those nursery rhymes and stories? Before they became published, they were people's actually guide to what to do and not to do. Peter and the Wolf. In them days, they lived in forested areas full of wolves. So the stories were there to help those kids survive. And today, we see them as fairy stories when they're actually a basis of Europe's history, but the oral history of Europe. So
there are clues about deep time, about living through deep time, embedded in those stories that you share.
Every story has in some cases, a double meaning, but in most cases it points to something that happened. In my area, we're lucky. On one side we're mountains, on the other side we're all water. Our difficulty is, since 1980s, have said there's no wet scleral forest anymore in my area because no one's checked. But with so many dugs run through, so many logging, the water isn't going the way it used to. When you go up through Healesville in the back there, you see these running water where people stop and fill a bottle full of earth water, but nobody's telling you that it broke the seal that was part of the underground that fed the water to all the riverways. So they're not wet scleral forests anymore in Victoria. They're bloody dry forests. This is why we had the bushfires in the 90s. And I'm going to make a prediction because me and daughter have talked about it. Yeah. Next year will be a worse fire year than we've had for a while.
And that terrifies me. But the idea of I love this idea that stories are a kind of form of, from a scientific point of view, there's almost data embedded in those stories. I'm going to come back to that if I can. Anne-Marie, let me weave you in. How do you relate to deep time as someone who spends your life thinking about, imagining, and then finding the fossils to help you have a tangible sense of ancient environments, including this environment that we're sitting in right now, as it was when this was a big supercontinent, Gondwana land?
Absolutely.
Or Gondwana.
Natasha. Yeah. So fossils, have definitely captured my imagination, and I think they're the closest thing we have to time travel. They can take us back to different worlds. The whole concept of deep time that we have is based on that geological timescale, such as the periods like the Jurassic, and so that's uses the evidence from the rocks themselves, and the layers within the rocks can be turned back like pages in a book, so we can actually read the history, the different environments and climates from Earth's past. So when Australia was part of Gondwana, the supercontinent, back in for example, in the Cretaceous, the forests covering the supercontinent across all the southern hemisphere and across the poles. There were no ice caps at the poles at that stage. So we've got fossils that show us evidence that it was much, much warmer at the poles. And so the leaves actually not only record the different kinds of ecosystems in the highlands and down in the plains, but also they record a lot about the carbon dioxide changes in the atmosphere and the greenhouse climates and the amount of fire that we can see during these times as well.
So just give us a visual sense. When you're looking at a plant fossil, I mean, a lot of us couldn't read, we don't speak fossil. You speak fossil. So when you look at a plant fossil, tell me about the signs that give you clues about what the environment was all those millennia ago.
Yeah, so for
when
example,
dinosaurs roamed.
That's right, dinosaurs roaming the Gondwanan continent. And for example, up in the highlands, we're seeing a lot of the conifers that still grow today that are out in the Gondwana Garden here, the Gandel Gondwana Garden, such as the Wallamai pine and relatives, like the Bunya Bunya pine, Norfolk Island pine, that are quite well known in Australia. So they were relatives tended to be in the highlands and the drier areas. Then down on the plains, we had a lot of the podocarps, which are similar to the modern plum pines from New South Wales, and they were growing more in the drier areas in the plains. And along the rivers and around the edges of the billabongs, we see lots of the ferns, very rich in the water-loving plants. That, again, a lot of their relatives still survive. But interestingly, a lot of people don't realise that this was a time in the early Cretaceous, only 100 million years ago. It's not very long in Earth's history. There were no flowers at that stage, and it was fairly cool early on in the Cretaceous, and it started to get warmer, and the flowers just appeared and diversified rapidly. So
And
even
Victoria is very
Darwin-
interesting, isn't it, actually?
So Victoria has one of the oldest flowers in the world, recorded from Coonawarra and Gippsland area. So a lot of the studies I've been involved with spores and pollen have shown how quickly they've diversified. And we have found some leaves as well in addition to that earliest flower. But they're still enigmatic. We're still unsure as to modern relatives or what kinds of plants they were.
So what does doing this work make you feel?
It's fascinating. It's very engrossing, I guess, because you're opening the layers of the rock, and the rock holds so much information. It holds the fossils. This is the first time you're seeing it since it was fossilised. So whether it be 50 million years ago, 100 million years ago, or more, and these plants, a lot of them from the Cretaceous time are still growing today. But also, there are a lot that have gone extinct. And so the ginkgo biloba is one of those modern relatives that was the last remaining species. And yet back in the Cretaceous, it was covering, and into the Jurassic, covering a lot of Gondwana. So we've got fossils here in Victoria of these ginkgo relatives.
So you get a real sense of, well, the passing of time and the coming and going of species. I love this theme that we're developing here. Uncle Larry with his stories connecting to the past. Anne-Marie's stories through the layers of rock, reading the layers of rock like a book. And Vincent Yolenti, you hung out for nearly 3 years with a whole stack of nuclear waste scientists and planners and collected their stories. Why?
Right. So that's correct. So they're an extremely interesting bunch. They set out to secure Finland's 2,300 tons of spent nuclear fuel deep underground, where it will hopefully be less vulnerable to future natural disasters, neglect, wars, sabotage, weaponization, and other events that could happen in the future. And they deal with these radically long-term timeframes. Remember, plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,100 years. Uranium-235 has a half-life of over 700 million years. Deep time is sort of papered into their everyday office lives. It becomes something they deal with on a daily basis. So I wanted to get inside their heads and see how this changes their worldviews and how they see reality. So I lived in Finland. I took Finnish language courses. I recorded 121 interviews. I took field notes, and I explored how they grappled with long-term planetary futures. And I saw how their cognition and their approach to ethics and responsible planetary stewardship changed as these visions of far future bodies, societies, and ecosystems entered into their everyday office lives of, meetings and number crunching, data reporting, regulatory requirements, industry initiatives. And I turned this into the book you mentioned, Deep Time Reckoning. And I argued that something a little like Finland's nuclear waste experts' long-sighted sensibilities should be normalized across society. It should be woven more tightly into the fabric of our institutions. And
what
the
was
book
interesting,
put forth a series.
Vincent,
Yes.
what was particularly interesting, because we can't time travel, really, but we can through all the ways that we're talking about today. They've had to basically rehearse the future in interesting ways so that they can kind of experiment with, well, what are the scenarios that nuclear waste could be exposed to? Just describe some of the proxies, some of the situations they kind of had to road test in the real world.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, the Finnish nuclear waste experts knew it wasn't possible to visit the far future and see what happens there, of course. So they created these sort of analogies of deep time. And the idea is that they're sort of everywhere. They're sort of right beneath our noses, right? So they had to figure out how a future Finnish glacial ice sheet could possibly weigh on the repository during and after the next ice age. And that's 50 or 60,000 years from now. So they studied a massive glacial ice sheet near Kangerlussuaq, Greenland, and collected data on groundwater and ice and permafrost, and sort of studied present-day Greenland as if it's far future Finland. Let me give another example. They wanted to figure out how the country's landscape could erode over the coming ice ages, the waxing and waning of ice ages across time. So they looked at this crater lake, Lake Lapijärvi, that formed after a meteor crash into Finland 73 million years ago. And they wanted to forecast the future of this copper nuclear waste canister that would hold the spent fuel, see whether it would corrode over the long term. So for that, they looked at this Mesozoic copper deposit they found in mudstone in England. And they found that this copper was preserved for 170 million years without succumbing to major corrosion. So of course, there's limits to what these analogies can tell us about the future. They don't predict the future, but they can offer this kind of real world concreteness, or they're good to think with. They're a little more tangible than empty speculation. They're stand-ins for future conditions that can stretch the imagination across time and space. And just as Dr. Tussolini said of fossils, I will say they're the closest things analogs of deep time are some of the closest things we have to time travel available to us today, at least in the realm of our intellects and imaginations.
It's interesting. I think people will be interested to hear that you think we should be taking inspiration from people designing a nuclear waste facility. I've been to that facility actually, and you climb down into the earth. I think it was the same facility. It's like a spiral. You walk down into the earth where they're going to put the canisters. It's quite spooky and incredible. But this is a community that are involved in a technology that contributes to the ultimate existential risk facing humanity in some sense. So you're thinking, well, we should perhaps take our inspiration from them, use them as guides for an inspiration for deep time thinking.
That would be correct. And it's interesting that not all the nuclear waste experts, and I would not even say most, were necessarily excited about nuclear power, or excited about nuclear weapons, or excited about the things that produce this nuclear waste. They had a very pragmatic sensibility that said, the waste is here. I want to be a strong environmental steward, and I want to come up with ways of cleaning this up and putting it deep underground where it's more safe. So getting to know their thinking patterns, yes, was a powerful and interesting experience. It took me a while to get there. But when you engage with 10,000 years from now, you can sort of imagine yourself in the position of future human and non-human communities. You can strain to put yourself in the shoes of far future people, and it gives you a sense of empathy for landscapes and people and other organisms across decades, centuries, and millennia. And I think that doing exercises like this, using resources like the safety assessments created by the nuclear waste experts of Finland, for instance, can help make us more responsible planetary stewards attuned to our collective survival and environmental stewardship. Perhaps it'll inspire people to protect biodiversity and be better stewards of ecosystem services across time, such as pollination or carbon sequestration, nutrient cycling, etc. Perhaps it'll draw people to support regenerative agriculture practices or reduce their consumption of energy or single-use plastics. Or maybe it'll get us thinking about intergenerational equity a little more. How can we reduce debt burdens and ensure access to natural resources for future people? So these are the kind of things going through not just my head, but also the heads of the Finnish nuclear waste experts trying to make these 10,000-year ecosystem models and models of the geophysics of the site that actually, hydrogeology of the site that actually go 500 or even 750,000 years into the future sometimes.
Wow, what a fascinating community to spend time amongst. Hey, I'm wanting your questions on Slido, slido.com, code #Gondwana1603. Come on, get cracking. I want some questions, especially from you if you're joining us online. Uncle Larry Walsh, we're hearing from Vincent there, who spent time amongst a community of people that are imagining ourselves in, 5, 10, 20,000 years from now. But Aboriginal people have been walking this planet for all that time, back in time. And I wonder how you see this marriage between the knowledge that you carry in stories and the knowledge that we describe as scientific knowledge today.
Well, I see a correlation. You see, why we didn't have a written language, but we also knew what every animal, both internally and externally, looked like, even the ones we didn't eat. We knew their patterns of behaviour. We knew the patterns of behaviour of the whole of the environment. Like there'd be signs that say, look out, we're going to get a storm. Oh, we're going to get the big wet, which means not just the ordinary winter. They see those signs in the environment. Today, unfortunately, we have a lot of people through colonisation that were similar to you. We're worried about next year's where we're getting our money from. We're worried about this and that. Governments every 4 years, finances every year telling you all these things, and they're making you think short term. I have worked with a few Aboriginal people, and we started doing an exercise on planning for our future growth in a certain area over a 10-year period. And I tell other groups, the idea is for you, as a starting exercise, imagine where you want this place to be in 10 years. Then plan all the steps you need. Then you've got politicians interfering. So that's why you have maybe a different angle for every 10 years, but then you might have to swap them over because of the politics of the day, the government that got elected or a new government and things like that. I have at times done things that I know I won't see the result of. It's my grandchildren or my great-grandchildren that if I'm right, they'll see the result. I use an analogy that I use every now and then, which is I'm just a farmer. I grab a seed, I tell you what I think this seed is going to grow into, I plant it. The thing is, because trees can take a couple of 100 years to grow, I have to pass the story on so that the generation that sees it in full bloom, they might go, oh, wait on, that old story. Yeah, it's doing part of it, but it's not doing it all. So they then take a seed and plant it, knowing they're passing on 2 stories rather than 1. The idea is we are not the experts. There's some things, like the other day I was talking to a mate, and he's gone, you talked about some of those 30 years ago, and now they're coming up. I didn't know the language back then. So it's about, people would go, oh, I'm looking for the mother tree, the oldest tree in the land. And I go, no, look underneath the land.
Yeah.
It's much older. And
look to the roots.
Yeah, look to the roots, but look to what feeds the roots. Like these days I learnt this word, mycelium. Okay, you all know what it is.
Those incredible fungal networks
Yes.
in the root systems of
Yes,
trees, around
but
the root
now
system, in the soil.
Yes, and now people though trying to turn it into science is trying to turn it into a commercial product to get rid of all your waste material. Because, fungi will break it down over time, but have you got the time? Why not fix what we can now? I have a belief that if you get lichen, fungi, and moss, you create vibrant soil. But it takes a long time to do. So we have to find a process that we can assist with that, because I'm sorry to say, I do believe climate change will happen, and I think it's our responsibility to slow it down so that our future generations can survive it. And I'm not talking about just humans. I'm talking about plant species, animal species. We may lose some, bird species, the whole works. We may lose some, but we may give some a chance to adjust to the coming future.
Every generation of every species forever and ever and ever, for all of time. Anne-Marie Tosolini, you have this perspective from thinking about the cycles and lives of plants throughout time. And I wonder, as you piece together what Gondwana looked like, what does it tell you about what our future might look like?
One of the really interesting things, following on from Vincent and Uncle Larry, was that they noticed that there were analogues and proxies in the past that can help us to understand the future. And that's the same in reading the rocks and the fossils. They actually particularly the leaf fossils, act as very good proxies for understanding the past climates. As I mentioned, they can record levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. And so a lot of our understanding of the climate system comes from looking at past climates. For example, it was noticed, I think back in the 1700s, that the changes of Earth's orbit around the sun is in cycles, and this is influencing the glacial interglacial cycles. And we can see from carbon dioxide levels back in the Cretaceous, for example, that is probably about double what we're seeing today. And as I mentioned, the poles are the ones that actually change significantly. The equatorial regions may not change their climate much, but the polar regions certainly will be a lot warmer. We're seeing lots of extreme weather, fire, and we've seen these influences and drivers of climate, and we really need to understand these natural systems because that's key to being able to help mitigate against climate change in the future.
The natural systems that sustain us. Hey, I can see all your questions coming in now. This is a great thing. So let me throw some of them at you. From Anonymous, hello Anonymous, the political, I am interested to know how we might integrate deep time thinking into current political decision making and the short political cycle. Vincent Yolenti, let's get your perspective on that.
Integrating into the short political cycle will be extremely difficult. I would point to something a little broader. Let's continue the point about analogs we were going with before. I used to live in Washington, D.C., a city where a lot of political cycles emanate from across the country and across the globe. And I worked at George Washington University a few blocks from the White House just a few years ago. And I'd always noticed there's these bald cypress trees right near the White House. They were planted in the mid-1800s in Lafayette Square. And in 1922, excavation crews were clearing ground for the building this Mayflower Hotel, and they found fossilized cypresses a few meters underground, and they realized that these grew about 100,000 years ago and lived to be about 1,700 years old. And when I saw these, suddenly my mind escaped from the realm of politics and the rapid political cycles all around me, and took a little trip into deep time through the power of analogy. It helped me sort of walk through the city using this cypress, this really old cypress, as a proxy, to use Anne Marie's words, for imagining America's capital city as a literal swamp. And I realized that, contemplating deep time can help you stretch your momentary now into wider histories and futures and distance you from your day-to-day short-termism. And I would say that just the act of doing that and integrating that into your everyday routines will help motivate people to see the urgency of slower moving threats such as climate change and biodiversity loss, because it's a more fundamental part of your day. The issue is that deep time is everywhere, but it's almost invisible. It's very hard to attune to it. But once you attune to it, it changes your politics. And I hope that happens to many more people in the future, and that we have sort of a grassroots movement up calling for a reframing of how our institutions work and our political cycles plot on.
So we need to drag those politicians out of Congress, past those cypress trees, and get them contemplating these questions outside of that political cycle. We've got another question here. How can we stimulate young generations about deep time? Post-pandemic, I'm finding my students lack curiosity, disengagement with deep discourses. Uncle Larry, what do you think about that? Getting kids connected. Maybe we need to make TikTok videos and YouTube videos about deep time. And I hope you're watching right now on YouTube.
I was thinking of actually doing 2 videos of the koala stories and then pointing out that I never got to complete the 3rd one because of bloody dams. Sorry to say that. But for me, it's that I see myself as a continuum of something that, as far as recorded in my region, I think 40,000 years. I see myself as a continuum. I'm not I sometimes joke, I'm a jack of all trades rather than a master of none. The difficulty, I believe, is that since the 1800s, science has got more one track. Science no longer sees itself as interrelating with each other. Like the fact that I say fungi, I tried to find a moss expert from the 2 universities I know of, I couldn't find one. We need to start looking at it holistically, What keeps these plants alive is the same thing that keeps us alive. So if we are caring properly for the earth, we keep ourselves alive. I pass on what I know, but the things I've added to what I know, such as I've been always visiting the same forest, and I've noticed little changes like moss creeping up, very slowly too, by the way. I could think over 30 years I've measured an inch. So what I'm getting at is we need science to talk to each other rather than become singular as they are. You're the expert in this, that's all I'm doing. No, your expertise actually, and that person's expertise, would, if you talk to each other and work together, give you some answers that you haven't quite got from just your expertise. And I say mix it with some of the indigenous cultures because they've lived through volcanoes, they've lived through earthquakes, they've lived through, all the Northern Territory was once a inland sea that came before New Guinea and all them were around. And so that's still a known thing, that people lived through those things. Why? They adapted with every change. But they had time in the past because the stories gave them clues on how that was going to happen, why maybe it was going to happen, and how they could survive it. Today, as I say, we're all fairy tales and myths and legends rather than actually looking for the truth in the core of them. The truth is in there, giving you clues on what changed and made that animal, bird, insect change. We need to work together, but the problem is science speaks a different language to people. And so we need anthropologists who are people who learn those languages and able to win the trust of those people to tell the story so that the anthropologist can tell it to the scientists who then can examine it and go, oh, we can do something.
So let's come to a scientist, a geologist. Anne-Marie, how are you hearing this challenge? What responsibility do you think you have to communicate the knowledge that you're revealing about deep time to the wider public, so that and politicians, so that they can actually take some responsibility for future planning?
Uncle Larry has a great point, that often the interpretation, I guess, of the science to the community is lost. But I think journalists like yourself have played an amazing role, and I think it's a bit easier these days with the internet to actually get the messages out there. And I think one of the really amazing things about studying climate change in deep time is that it has happened so much. The plants loved it with carbon dioxide increases. There's recorded an incredible jump about 56 million years ago of carbon dioxide causing about 8 degrees of warming in a very short geological time, but it's still 10,000 years. So these analogues in the past are telling us that it's going on all the time in the natural system, but it is the rate today that is unprecedented in Earth's history. And as Uncle Larry pointed out, and Vincent has talked about, these are things that are happening that the natural systems are not able to keep up with, and whether the humans is imperative that we get on top of this and keep up with this rate of change and preserve biodiversity loss or prevent biodiversity loss.
So we heard the gasp in the audience when you said that. The rate of change being unprecedented. And we have a sense of that, but why isn't that being yelled to the rooftops, to the treetops?
I reckon 3 reasons. One is politicians.
Who we vote in.
Yeah, but they don't like making unpopular decisions. It's become an art form that all of them either have a law degree or an economic degree, and they're the wrong people. How in the heck did for 100 years Australia get it right without any qualified lawyers, without any qualified bankers, without any qualified all these other politicians' things? Because they lived in their environment and they took that into account. The first fish farm done in Victoria was done in the 50s. Why? Because they seen that fishing would be a growth industry. And they didn't want the rivers and waterways to run out of fish, so they built fish breeding places. The oldest one is in my area, that's why I know about it. And it was the National Party, which these days call themselves the National Party, but back then the Country Party. Just ordinary citizens who could see a need in their area, who could see what the visitors wanted and what the locals wanted and needed, and work on that. Yeah, the roads we got today are Instamatic. The first freeway took about 20 years of planning. Now, it's, let's do it in a year. Yeah. Plan it and find the money. No, they had a look at that freeway will be needed in 20 years from now because our population growth.
I love how freeways have crept into our conversation.
Well, it's part of what I'm saying is that it's wrong because they're not taking into account our growth. They're taking into account their headline. So politicians get elected because of their headlines. They don't get elected because they lie to you, because they do. They don't get elected for telling you the truth, because they get elected for making promises that they're not even sure they can fulfil.
They can keep, yeah. Vincent Yolenti, how are you listening to this conversation, and particularly this question of how we compel others to think like this?
Right. I think compelling others is a tricky place to start. I think that with something like this that's so against all the what I call shallow time discipline, or what I called previously tempocentrism or chronophobia, people need to be inspired. They need to see it for themselves, and they have to go out and trek out and then see a different world. For instance, in October of 2021, I was camping. And I was camping in the Snake Range in eastern Nevada. And I was appreciating the sort of vast temporal breadth of the environments there. Mount Washington goes up 13,000 feet, and it has these limestone cliffs from the Precambrian age and the Cambrian period, about 560 million years ago. There's trilobite fossils there. We go to the top, and then we see these bristlecone pine trees, and bristlecones can actually live to be 4,000 years old or longer, and we saw some that are thousands and thousands of years old. We knew there's a melting Pleistocene alpine glacier there. We knew that there were 3,000-year-old indigenous cave paintings there. We knew there was a dark abandoned mine shaft going into the mountain to pull out beryllium to make weapons and aerospace technologies. And strangely enough, there was this thing there called the Forgotten Winchester, which is a rifle that was left in late 19th century, just sitting against a tree, fully loaded, that someone in 2014 just walked upon, and then picked up again and said, hey, this hasn't moved, and this is still loaded, and it's statically sat in this landscape. So this is a landscape where all these different time spans fold into each other. And people have to go out and see this. They have to read the landscapes, they have to read the natural world, and then the cognitive shift comes, then the ethical shift comes, and then politics change. And when you do this, it's kind of suspends your short-term predicaments and grinds them up into the shifting sands of deep time. And it creates space for thinking inside of you, thinking in a more big picture and holistic way. And this is a practice that I call long storming. And that's where it has to start. Consciousness change, I think.
Yeah, I love that. We've got a really lovely question from Katrina saying, our dominant culture in this conversation assumes time is linear, but I'm aware time is a spiral or otherwise non-linear for other cultures. Does anyone have a comment on that?
Yeah, look, someone the other day asked me whether I draw a thing because they were looking at something that said, here's the land and here's all the bloody things that Aboriginal did in the land. I had one look at it and said, that's linear, that's whitefellow way. All of them, you put the land, the environment, and everything becomes an egg shape. Art, story, song, dance, ceremony are all part of one, not 5 separate categories. We think too much on linear rather than think about how it is a cycle. Our weather patterns are cycles. The way we live in the environment, whether we live in a house in the city or in the bush, because of what we do, it's a cycle. Everything is cyclic, but we all start, because of the way we are educated these days, think in a linear line, a straight line. And so I started redrawing this thing. Next week they want to film me doing it. Because I'm saying, no, the concept you're getting from these so-called university experts is wrong, because their teaching is linear. Our teaching was everything was interrelated and it was all cyclic.
Yeah, and we see that with the fire season, as per your your thoughts about next fire season. There are cycles.
Yes.
We are part of cycles, and fire is part of that cycle.
Yeah, and we get big rains at times that, like some years it'll rain a bit more than other years. Again, that big wet will happen again. It's just a cycle. It's just that because we as Aboriginal people didn't measure time, unfortunately now science is trying to measure the time and get these things right so that they are better. But the other problem is they do it as an overall thing, right? I live just on the other side of the mountain range. I mean, the Great Divide. We're 3 degrees different to Melbourne. We are not influenced by the sea patterns. We're influenced by the northwest patterns of wind, not the same patterns of wind that Melbourne. So when you see all these weather predictions, you can go to some areas and the locals will go, they got it wrong again, because they know in their area the cycle's slightly different to what is being mentioned.
Have to pay attention to, it's the localisation, isn't it? Every location's got a different story, but then there's the big story. And one of the questions that has come in is the goal of deep time planning to keep Earth as unchanged as possible from the present, planning for the well-being of assumed humans existing in the future? I wonder what your thoughts are about that question. It's quite a delicious one. Vincent?
I would say no. I can't imagine a world in which change is possible, and a world without change. I can't see that being something that could exist, because here's a good example, right? Take something like Stonehenge. Stonehenge has existed for thousands of years in pretty much the same form. It's rocks in a field. But over the long sweep of history, the interpretive frameworks we use to approach this, and this gets back to the questions of linear or cyclical, right? They rise and they fall, they intensify, they weaken. In 1599, poet and playwright Samuel Daniel described Stonehenge as a big dumb heap. In the 17th century, we have Isaac Newton describing this thing as an antecedent of Solomon's Temple. In the 19th century, we have William Blake calling it Satan's work in England. And then today, UNESCO sees it as World Heritage to be conserved for posterity. And it makes you question, what are people going to think 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now? Maybe it'll be a big dumb heap again. So even if you have a linear axis of history, you can have cyclical reinterpretations of things. So even if we keep the world the same, if we keep the world static, we try to change, the interpretive frameworks are going to change dramatically, even through the decades. So to go back to the question about politics that Uncle Larry and Anne-Marie both brought up, well, perhaps people will be tearing down statues 100 years from now of present-day politicians who didn't do anything about climate change or didn't do anything about a lot of the biodiversity crisis we see today, because they'll be seeing it from a different temporal framework. So no, I don't think a static world is possible. It'll change even if we try to keep it the same.
Yeah. And there's a good question which we might wrap on, but what stories are we telling now that speak to our time, which future people might read to understand our time? Anne-Marie?
Wow. That's
climate change is one of them.
So, climate change and biodiversity loss is what's written in the how we understand mass extinction on such a scale of the dinosaurs. And remarkably, that wasn't the biggest mass extinction of all time. The biggest one was caused by climate change. So, absolutely, I think climate change is something that we need to be addressing now, and at least things are starting to get rolling in society. With things like changes of energy, as well as car use. And a lot of these focus has changed to the broader environment and biodiversity loss and how we can stem that into the future.
But as you study the plants of the deep past, do you wonder about the plants that will no longer be in the deep future?
So
because of
plants,
climate change?
Yeah, the plants do have a bit more longevity quite often, as we've seen with some like the Wollemi pine, but there are so many that fall by the wayside. And when the flowering plants evolved, they actually forced out a whole lot of range of other cycad relatives at the time as well. So all life does change constantly. There's background extinction going on, but we need to look at our own use of environment and how we can work better to pull back on the extent of the extinction that we're seeing at this stage.
We've only got a minute left, but I'll weave this in as part of that question. You know, we've just been living through a global pandemic, and it's kind of like a nightmare here in Melbourne, isn't it? Did we really experience that over the last few years? I just don't know. Things feel sort of more normal now. Weird, isn't it? It's like, what happened then? And someone's asked, you know, has COVID changed how you consider how resilient, non-resilient humans are going forward? I mean, COVID will certainly be part of the story that we pass to future generations, won't it?
Yeah, again, it's where we must be careful about how much of the land we destroy. Because every time we destroy land, we end up with a new disease. You could go all the way back to, in my lifetime, half the flus came from animals because we destroyed their habitats. AIDS supposedly come from animals because we were encroaching on their habitats. We have to keep a balance between how much we damage the environment, because its kickback is we get a new illness. That's the kickback. So please think of it that way. Do you want to go through another 3-4 years of another COVID? You know?
Hell no.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. Stop destroying, because sometimes those plants keep that microism, whatever it's called, in the ground. And then we release it and animals get strained. They get all, what do they call it, anxious and things. And some of their diseases then spread into us. So we have a responsibility to look after our own health by stop interfering in their cycle.
Yeah. And if ever there was a lesson, it's COVID, hey, about how we might think differently about the future. Now is the time that we could be actually creating a different future. And Vincent Yolenti, finally to you, how do you imagine what stories will be passed down from the present moment to 10,000 years from now?
Well, I'm thinking some things. What stories will be around 10,000 years from now? A lot of the ones are the stories that have been around 10,000 years ago. Indigenous stories that have been passed across generations. 2,000 years ago, there's 3,000 years ago, there's biblical stories from ancient Greece and Rome. But I think that the most important stories at this point are those that are embedded in a landscape and that can convey something to people across time. It might not be written in words, but it's written in an ecosystem. You can tell people have been on an ecosystem. For instance, I live in Northern California, and I visit Redwood National Park frequently on weekends. I go to Fern Canyon. And written in the landscapes is a story, right? The story of a stream carving out this canyon with 50-foot walls. There's these ancient species of ferns on cliffs, and that could be traced back 325 million years. There's coast redwoods here, some of the tallest living things on Earth. They've been here for 20 million years. There's stories of Yurok people who have lived for generations in these canyons. villages of redwood planks. They
And I
grew
should
on
just say,
waterways and dugout canoes.
let me throw
And,
into the mix that, someone here has said in Victoria we are struggling to persuade our politicians to stop logging our unique deep time forests. So how can we use your wonderful timeframes to help is the question.
And exactly. And in these deep time forests, which is a beautiful way to put it, deep time ecosystems, there's lessons for us. There's morals. There's a moral at the end of the story when you walk through the canyon and come out. And it's no surprise that they literally enter into some of those popular stories of our day. Like Steven Spielberg actually went to this Fern Canyon that I was talking about and filmed Jurassic Park Lost World there, which is people's encounter with the dinosaurs from the earliest stage of their life. BBC went there and wrote something called Walking with the Dinosaurs because it looks like a prehistoric landscape. IMAX made something called Dinosaurs Alive there. So right now in our time-bound moment, it's Jurassic Park, Walking with the Dinosaurs, and IMAX. But this landscape will continue to generate stories for whoever lives there across the long term. And then we have to protect these deep time landscapes so they can continue to tell and inspire stories for future generations and future cultural groups that live there.
I can't think of a better message to end the night on. Let's thank Uncle Larry Walsh, Vincent Yolenti and Anne-Marie Tossolini.
And thank you for being the host.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you so much.
Natasha.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much for joining us on the live stream. If you did, thank you for your wonderful questions. Thank you for being in the crowd here at the Melbourne Museum. We would love you to fill out the survey that they're going to send you. That really helps the museum understand what you love and what you'd like to see at events like this. Don't forget the Future Forum series. The next one is on the 27th of April. It's called AI, the Next Generation. It's going to be at ScienceWorks on Thursday, the 27th of April, celebrating International Day of Women and Girls in ICT, that's Information and Communications Technology. So take your daughters. Take your daughters. They're going to be exploring the potential of AI to positively contribute to our world, not just take all our jobs. And I think that's a really good one to take kids along to because they are the ones that will be helping to build an ethical framework for artificial intelligence. So let's get those young kids really across that. So fill out the survey, and the incentive to do that when you get that email is that you'll be in the running for a $50 museum store voucher and a family pass to visit the Gandel Gondwana Garden. And don't forget, this wonderful museum is a living collection. It's about the deep past, but it is also about the present, and it's very much about preserving biodiversity in the future. This is a really powerful, mighty institution that you've come along to tonight, and it really thrives with your support and passion and contribution. So we were also recording tonight for the ABC for Big Ideas at ABC Radio National, 621 AM, or check us out on the ABC Listen app. All our podcasts are there, and I present a show called Science Friction. Fantastic to have you here. Thanks. Have a great night. Enjoy. Thanks, Vincent.
Okay, thank you.
So glad that you were able to stay up. We should let you go to sleep now. That was wonderful.
Yeah, well, after this huge coffee, I think I could probably do another.
That's right. You're not going to be able to sleep at all.
Another event after this. So getting to sleep is going to be tricky. But this was fantastic. It was great to meet you all, and you're. I think we're overlapping in interesting ways and diverging in interesting ways, and there's some real fantastic conversation.
Yeah, really lovely synergies between you all. I'm going to let you go rather than everyone hearing our back chatter. So thank you to the tech team as well. Bye, Vincent. Good night. Sleep tight.
Bye, Vincent.